So the Academy Awards are coming up on March 10th, and the nominations are out. So I thought I'd use this time to talk about my picks for what I feel are the best of the Oscar nominations here. And unlike some of the voters or some of the other people who might want to weigh in on this topic, I actually have seen all the films that are nominated, with the exception of the short films for short documentary, short live action, and short animation. I have seen most of them. I've seen quite a fair number of them, but not enough where I feel like I could make a concise recommendation for what I feel is the best film in that category. That being said, for all the bigger categories, I have seen all the films, and I would like to voice what I feel are the best picks for those nominations. So let's start it off here with Best Visual Effects, and the nominations are The Creator, Godzilla -1, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, and Napoleon. Now, among all these, I know a lot of people are kind of pulling for Godzilla -1, which I have to admit, these are all fairly strong nominations, and Godzilla -1 for especially for the budget they had and for kind of sneaking in December. It very much surprised me. I love the way that it looks, and when Godzilla kind of and this is true of every Godzilla film for me, when Godzilla powers up for his atomic breath and you see him light up and he's powering up and he's about to shoot that energy, that always gives me goosebumps. And Godzilla -1 did a fantastic job on building up the threat of Godzilla. But with all the nominations considered, honestly, I kind of have to go with The Creator. And it's mostly just because I like the way that, because the biggest thing that a lot of people have been talking about with The Creator is that it was shot on a small budget. Now, when I say small budget, I mean $80 million. I think it was roughly $80 million, something like that. It was definitely under $100 million. But a key aspect of those visual effects is that a lot of them were shot on location. I believe in Thailand. And just the way that they're integrated into a natural environment and creating this kind of believable kind of dystopian environment where these AI androids try to live among humans. I felt did a really good job integrating that, especially for and you think about a film with AI and robots. You don't typically my mind immediately goes stuff like Blade Runner, where it's in this cold dystopia of skyscrapers and stuff like that. And but with The Creator, a lot of the film it takes place outside and these vast mountains, and you get to see all the natural environment, and it's just it just embraces a lot of the beauty and just puts in the CGI on top of it, and as a result it actually kind of feels more natural. So with best visual effects, all things considered, I think The Creator did a great job of implementing these visual effects into a natural environment. So yeah, my pick for best visual effects is The Creator. Okay, next up is best sound, and the excuse me there. All right, next up is best sound, and the nominations are The Creator, Maestro, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, Oppenheimer, and The Zone of Interest. Now, in terms of, this was, I was going back and forth on this about which nomination that I felt was the best here, because they're all fairly strong. The Creator in terms of how it meshed, the mechanical into natural environments, the aspects of Maestro and Mission Impossible with the stunts, and Oppenheimer with all the sound that they used for implementing, how the science was happening in the development of this weapon and the zone of interest. But all things considered, I feel like the zone of interest is my pick. And I think a lot of that goes to the fact that the sound is almost like another character in that film. Because you have these elements of the Holocaust that are right next door, and the only visible aspect of this horrible atrocity of history is within the sound itself. So you hear like some like screaming, shouting of the guards, screaming of the prisoners, gunshots, and just, the horrific sounds going on just next door to, this fairly, nice looking family home where the family doesn't take that much heed of all the horrors that are going on just like a few feet away from them. I get, with all things considered, zone of interest is my pick for best sound. Okay, now let's get to best, I'm sure a lot of people have opinions on this one, best song. Okay, so the nominations for best song are The Fire Inside from Flamin' Hot, I'm Just Ken from Barbie, It Never Went Away from American Symphony, Wasase from Killers of the Flower Moon. I'm probably butchering that title, by the way. I know it's meant to translate to something else. I just didn't put it in there. And What Was I Made For from Barbie. Now, I went back and forth on this for a bit because I think, with Barbie having two nominations, I feel it's pretty obvious that Barbie's going to win here. So it's ultimately, question of, which song is more memorable. And even outside of all the Barbie mania, I still feel like I'm Just Ken is the best song here. It's the one song from Barbie that I can't get out of my head. It's the most memorable. It has the best sequence. It's a very fun song too, that you just can't stop. At least I can't stop thinking about it. So I think it's pretty obvious that I'm Just Ken is the best song. So yeah, my pick for the best song is I'm Just Ken from Barbie. Okay, next up is production design. And the nominations for production design are Barbie, Killers of the Flower Moon, Napoleon, Oppenheimer, and Poor Things. Fairly tough category, just because every single one of these films embodies a different type of world here that doesn't feel like it's just kind of redundant. I was going back and forth about, which film I wanted to win more. Because Barbie obviously had a lot of work put into it, but Poor Things as well. It's mostly just because I love the way that they're trying to establish worlds that feel real, but still fantastical at the same time. And I think with all those aspects considered, Poor Things has my vote in terms of production design, because just the ability for that film to kind of embrace a believable throwback Europe, but still still look wild and imaginary, and have this element where it still feels a bit grounded, I feel really works to the benefit of that film. That it's just it's beautiful to just kind of get lost in that world too, because it's supposed to be a world that does have horrors in it and relatable aspects that you would expect from that type of era, but still given this a little bit of a fantastical glaze, that it very much becomes an intoxicating film. So yeah, for production design, my pick is Poor Things. Next up is Best Music, and the nominations for that are American Fiction, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Killers of the Flower Moon, Oppenheimer, and Poor Things. For as much as I like Poor Things, because it's a very bizarre score. It's always meant to put you a little bit on edge because it always feels like it's off key. That I kind of like that aspect of it. But in terms of just genuinely powerful music, you can't beat Oppenheimer. The score for Oppenheimer is just so intoxicating, and like a lot of Christopher Nolan films, it's music that deeply engrosses you within that world. And like Nolan always has this great way of just choosing just the right composers to kind of make these aspects of like these epic aspects of the narrative come out within his music, and just I mean within the scores of his films. But yeah, I mean Oppenheimer, I can't stop thinking about that score too, just because like it's just so beautiful, and it's so beautiful and tragic at the same time, that I just couldn't stop thinking about it. So yeah, Oppenheimer is my pick for best score. Next up is best makeup and hair. And the nominations are Golda, Maestro, Oppenheimer, Poor Things, and Society of the Snow. And among all of them, I think the clear choice here for me is Poor Things. And it's mostly just because, like, not just because of Willem Dafoe's makeup here of trying to transform him into like this disfigured mad scientist, but just everything that went into, you know, like forming the weirdness of this film. Like, you know, aside just from, you know, how Dafoe is depicted, just like the other way that the characters are meant to depict this like this dapper aspect of society, like not to mention like the way that Emma Stone has like this very, very long hair throughout the film, and just like the way that Mark Ruffalo looks, and like the other characters they encounter who shift between being both like upper class and very clean cut while also still looking disgusting and being capable of, you know, just like these gross aspects, like, you know, especially like in the opening scenes where like Emma Stone is not entirely in control of her bodily functions, and she becomes a bit disgusting here and there. I think, yeah, like a lot of credit goes into Poor Things for kind of making that world and the weirdness come alive. So yeah, my pick for best makeup and hair is Poor Things. And now let's get to Best International Film. And the nominations for that category are Il Capitano, Perfect Days, Society of the Snow, The Teacher's Lounge, and The Zone of Interest. Now, I'm a little bit torn on this category because, like, for as much as I love The Zone of Interest, and I do feel like that film, just because, like, The Zone of Interest already has, like, a lot of nominations, it's probably going to win in this category. But my personal pick for this nomination, only because like I know Zone of Interest is probably going to win a lot of other stuff, is Perfect Days. Perfect Days, I feel, is just like, it's one of those films that just like I'm not going to stop thinking about for days. Part of the pun here, if that is a pun. But yeah, like Wim Wenders' film about like this sympathetic toilet cleaner. It's just, it's fascinating. It's beautiful. It's slow paced, but it has like a lot of humanity to it. That when I first saw the film, like I really, really liked it. Like it just barely got in on my top 10 list. But the more, when I first saw it, like, okay, this is a pretty good film for Wim Wenders. But the more that time passed, the more I kept thinking about the film, and the more I loved it more and more. And yeah, it's such a wonderful, slow paced but meaningful and sweet film that my pick for best international film is Perfect Days. So yeah, if you have not seen Perfect Days, and I know like a lot of people are seeing Zone of Interest right now, be sure to check out Perfect Days, because that is my pick for best international film. Now, let's get to Best Editing, and the nominations in that category are Anatomy of a Fall, The Holdovers, Killers of the Flower Moon, Oppenheimer, and Poor Things. Okay, so, you know, you have a Christopher Nolan film and a Martin Scorsese film. Both of these films, like, they run a little bit over, they run over 3 hours, and you know, they have to be expertly edited to maintain your attention. And usually they always are. Like, Nolan's films are always well edited, and Scorsese's films are always kind of feel like a masterclass in editing, just for how they keep up the pacing so quickly. So they're kind of like neck and neck for me. But with all things considered, like just beating it by like a hair for me is Oppenheimer, just because of the ground that's covered in Oppenheimer, and like the different events that it's meant to cover, as well as the events that are meant to kind of overlap with each other, like the scenes where Oppenheimer is being congratulated for the bomb while witnessing death and destruction around him amid the celebration, and then of course the other memorable scene where he's being interrogated about his love affairs, and then you see like you see that sexual affair kind of like invade the mind of everyone who's watching him in that moment. It's just beautifully assembled, and to sell that, the major developments of this film, and to keep you interested for like, a film that has like a lot of courtroom hearings and interrogations, in addition to scientific research. I feel like you need to have that film expertly edited to make it work. And it works so damn well in Oppenheimer that I have to give it up for Oppenheimer. That's my pick for best editing. Now let's move on to best documentary. And the nominations are Bobby Wine, The People's President, The Eternal Memory, Four Daughters, To Kill a Tiger, and 20 Days in Mariupol. And I think for me, like this was like a little bit of an easy pick here. For me at least, the obvious winner is 20 Days in Mariupol. Mostly because like it's a documentary about covering, the death and destruction in Ukraine from people who were on the ground while Russian troops were advancing, and the journalists behind this were putting themselves at huge risks with like tanks aiming at them, and they were just like a few feet away from like soldiers who could gun them down, and they just were barely able to escape with this footage. And just like and there's several moments where like you're witnessing, the people filming this were mostly filming people in hospitals, filming people in hospitals who were tended to the wounded from all these attacks. And there's you can feel like the despair in the air. But at the same time, when some of the doctors and nurses realize that they're being filmed for this documentary, they quickly point out, be sure to film this. Look at this. Like, this is the horror that's going on in Ukraine right now. Be sure to get this if you can. And thankfully, like, from the sounds of it, like the filmmakers just barely got out with this material. And just like the way that it's shot and the way that like it was, and especially like this was an area where they couldn't like easily like upload stuff to the cloud quickly. There were a few moments where they could, and they had to use them sparingly in order to get that footage out to the public. And it's just like, it's a testament to how important that type of journalism and filmmaking is to the world in that moment. That, yeah, it's a no-brainer for me on this. Like, best documentary is easily 20 Days in Mariupol. And now time for best costume design. And the nominations are Barbie, Killers of the Flower Moon, Napoleon, Oppenheimer, and Poor Things. Now, I was a tad bit torn between Barbie and Poor Things just because they both have very elaborate costumes that kind of like stick out in these types of narratives. But I mean, for me at least, like the way that like the costumes in Poor Things were assembled were just wonderfully absurd. And surprisingly fitting for like the type of era that they were going for with that film. That I feel like Poor Things really worked for me. Like Barbie has a lot going for it, but Barbie also had like a bigger template to work with. It was most like they had like a framework of just trying to like replicate all of Barbie's costumes, which they did like quite beautifully. Like I love the way they just like outright draw attention to them throughout the course of the film, but just like the absurdity that was placed in like some of the costuming, especially with Emma Stone's very like big shoulder dresses in Poor Things, just really attracted my eye a lot more. So yeah, in terms of best costuming, my choice is Poor Things. And now the nominations for best cinematography, and the nominations are El Conde, Killers of the Flower Moon, Maestro, Oppenheimer, and Poor Things. And I mean, again, much like best editing, you have a Nolan film, you have a Scorsese film, and those are just amazing to look at the way that they're assembled here. And I know that like there's a lot of excitement for Oppenheimer. And it is beautifully shot. I love the way that a lot of the scenes are set up with just not just showcasing like the vastness of the experiment, but especially like the adherence to close-ups. I love how uncomfortably close that film gets at times to its subjects to kind of like almost like bore straight into their head. But again, much like with like best editing, Scorsese, I mean, kind of the inverse of best editing here, because Scorsese kind of like inches out Oppenheimer for me in this category, just because I love the way that Scorsese frames a lot of this this Midwest territory here, and especially the way that he kind of uses it to kind of like signal different aspects in the story. Like at one point, like I love where Leonardo DiCaprio is kind of like looking out over this field that's set aflame, and it's so perfectly like it's thematically appropriate and symbolically perfect of showcasing how like this is the hell that he has built for himself. Not to mention like a lot of the wide shots are just absolutely gorgeous in Killers of the Flower Moon. You really get to see like kind of like take in like the land and you know how it's being cultivated, and like you know kind of taking in almost kind of like the eye of Willie King Hale in this by you know like looking at all that potential there, even though like Hale's you know the way that Hale looks at it is just like he wants to exploit everything here. That yeah, it's gorgeously shot that you know like an evil person will look at that and say, yeah, we got to rip all that out. We got to destroy all this. Because there are like some genuinely like gorgeous shots in there, and just like the way everything is framed, especially you know like the scene, like there's a big explosion at one point, the scenes of execution where you get to take in all the environment. It's a film that very much lets you into that world, and Scorsese is usually really good about framing his films that way, that it feels like you're right there within that community, and you get to explore every tiny little aspect of it, while still getting like a vast, you know, like a vast like idea of where everything is in this narrative. Like even like the little elements, like where there's a car race through town, when Leonardo DiCaprio's character first meets Robert De Niro, when you get like that gorgeous like drone shot, like that's just beautiful stuff. Absolutely beautiful. So yeah, like my choice for best cinematography is Killers of the Flower Moon. And now let's go over the nominations for best animated film. And the nominations are The Boy and the Heron, Elemental, Nimona, Robot Dreams, and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Really good selection this year. I'm really pleased with pretty much all these nominations here. And I'm a bit torn between The Boy and the Heron and Across the Spider-Verse, because I felt like both films were not just like gorgeous to look at. They are. I mean, like, you know, Hayao Miyazaki's traditional animation is always a sight to behold, and you know, he proves it here again as well. But Across the Spider-Verse is also very experimental, very inventive, and is willing to try out different mediums and merge them in a very like creative way that like a lot of CGI animated films are just not doing these days. But you know, thinking about both films, ultimately I came down to Spider-Verse. I think that Across the Spider-Verse is just like an amazingly assembled animated film, not just for like the juggling of mediums, but also for its thematic elements about wanting to break canon and do your own thing, and kind of like, you know, not be bound by, you know, whatever like Destiny or comic books tell you to do. Like, you know, basically forging your own path, which, you know, saying that, The Boy and the Heron does have a lot of those similar elements as well, in terms of, you know, not being afraid to like let the castle go down and not just, you know, be bound to that legacy, you know, to build something up, you know, to build yourself as something more than just, you know, being like a continuation of something else. And the only reason that I kind of favored Spider-Verse a little bit more than The Boy and the Heron is only because like I've seen Miyazaki do this type of story before. Not quite exactly, but to like a similar degree, where I feel like it's almost kind of like better showcased in some of his other films. It is still a gorgeous and fascinating film, and I absolutely loved it. I actually kind of do love how The Boy and the Heron is a little bit more abstract than a lot of his other Studio Ghibli films. But when push comes to shove, Spider-Verse was ultimately the film that I kept thinking about, just because like it experimented. It was trying a lot of stuff that I hadn't seen before, and even though it carries like a similar thematic message, similar to The Boy and the Heron, it weaves it kind of like a little bit more like exciting and inspiring, I think, to me, just a bit more than The Boy and the Heron. So yeah, my choice for best animated film is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And now the nominations for best original screenplay. And the nominations are Anatomy of a Fall, The Holdovers, Maestro, May December, and Past Lives. Okay, so really, really good lineup here. I was debating this so much. This is really tough, just because like I love the way that Anatomy of a Fall is a courtroom drama and murder mystery that does not give you a clear answer. I love that aspect of it. I love that Past Lives addresses this aspect of realizing that, you know, the person you used to be is gone, and that you're never going to be able to go back to that. And while it's a part of like accepting life, it's also a really sad element as well. And that sadness comes about in this very internal and almost cerebral way that I really loved how it was evoked in that film. But The Holdovers, just for me at least, The Holdovers just has like a very crisp dialogue that it worked so well for me that I kind of got to go with The Holdovers, just because I think like it builds up the characters well enough. Like their dialogue feels it feels fairly natural, and a lot of that, of course, comes down to the actors here, who are all excellent in these roles. But yeah, like it you know, like a good screenplay is only good as the actors you have for it, and they do a great job here as well. So it's a little bit of a close call for me, but ultimately my pick for the best original screenplay among all these nominations is The Holdovers. Although, like, I'm kind of like neck and neck between that and Anatomy of a Fall and Past Lives. Those are also fantastic screenplays as well. And now it's time for Best Adapted Screenplay. And the nominations are American Fiction, Barbie, Oppenheimer, Poor Things, and The Zone of Interest. Again, another very, very, very tough one here. And even now, when I'm looking at like the nominations, I'm still kind of like going back and forth in my head a little bit about which one I want to choose. But I think in terms of like knowing the source material a little bit here, I kind of got to go with Poor Things, just because I think like Poor Things, like it makes a big change, well, a fairly big change from the original novel here. But it just like the way that it proceeds and what it wants to showcase, and more importantly, the philosophy and what it wants to be about, just it worked so well for me in that film. And it's just like there's very very, very poignant dialogue within there, but also just like loaded with absurd lines that, you know, again, much like with, you know, the original screenplay, you need a good cast for that. Poor Things has a great cast, and they make this script with such absurd lines as like, you know, I excuse me, I must go slap that baby, or something to that effect that Emma Stone has to say. Just wonderfully ridiculous lines like that, and being able to state those in earnest within the script, that you have faith in the audience to recognize the absurdity. It's just such a fascinating screenplay to me. So yeah, my pick for best adapted screenplay is Poor Things. And now we're on to Best Director. That's right, I'm going there right now. So the nominations for Best Director are Justine Triet for Anatomy of a Fall, Martin Scorsese for Killers of the Flower Moon, Christopher Nolan for Oppenheimer, Yorgos Lanthimos for Poor Things, and Jonathan Glazer for The Zone of Interest. And I know, like, with all the momentum that's been built up for Oppenheimer, I'm pretty sure that Christopher Nolan is going to win win the Academy Award for Best Director here. But ultimately, I'm kind of like, and it's mostly just because it's my favorite film of last year, but I kind of got to gravitate towards Yorgos Lanthimos for Poor Things. I think, for the material that he covers within that film, I feel like you need to be like very bold and like very confident in your direction to kind of like make this film that contains just so much absurdity, but also these very like astute observations on like sexuality, and philosophy and capitalism. I feel like you really gotta have like a lot of boldness to make that type of film work and direct it in a way where where like people will be able to perfectly read the absurdity and the jokes, as well as like take in the horror when it's meant to be witnessed. And with all that considered, Poor Things is my choice for best director, even though I'm pretty sure Christopher Nolan is going to win for Oppenheimer. Which I can't be too mad. Like, Oppenheimer is a very, very well directed film. So yeah, but personally, my pick and my choice is Yorgos Lanthimos. And now it's time for Best Supporting Actress. And the nominations are Emily Blunt for Oppenheimer, Danielle Brooks for The Color Purple, America Ferrera for Barbie, Jodie Foster for Niad, and Davine Joy Randolph for The Holdovers. Now, for me, this is kind of an easy one for me. Like, Davine Joy Randolph for The Holdovers just did it for me. Like, the way that she's able to just kind of like shift between being this very caring person, but also this very cynical person who just kind of rolls her eyes at people, in this very believable manner for like this woman who has endured the loss of her son. I think like it's a very delicate balancing act to make this like a very likable character who never feels like she's just playing at one tone. And especially when you get to like the Christmas party sequence, where she goes from just kind of like being like feeling a little bit out of place at this party to getting hammered and just like angry and sad about the past in a very believable way for someone who's kind of like gone through all that. I think it was just an amazing performance from her, especially the moment where she goes to visit family, and there's one scene that's perfectly set up without like a speck of dialogue that just has her kind of make the decision of letting go of her son's past by just like relinquishing like all these like mementos like from her son's childhood, and it's sad and it's tragic and it's beautifully showcased without like a line of dialogue, and Randolph just knocks it out of the park. So yeah, among all the nominations for Best Supporting Actress, my pick is Davine Joy Randolph. And now it's time for Best Supporting Actor, and the nominations in that category are Sterling K. Brown for American Fiction, Robert De Niro for Killers of the Flower Moon, Robert Downey Jr. for Oppenheimer, Ryan Gosling for Barbie, and Mark Ruffalo for Poor Things. This is probably the toughest category, at least for myself, to pick from, because everyone here is so damn good that it's tough. It's really tough because like everyone here is bringing like their A game. Like Sterling K. Brown brings a lot of energy. Robert De Niro is at his most sinister. Robert Downey Jr. just dominates the screen for like his plot within Oppenheimer. Ryan Gosling just is having too much fun playing Barbie, and Mark Ruffalo is just throwing himself into humility in Poor Things. And it's so close. It's so, even though I kind of have it in my head which one I want to win, I'm still going back and forth with this, but I'm just going to say it. My pick is Mark Ruffalo. Mark Ruffalo just goes out of his way to humiliate himself and just look like this, horny doofus who thinks that he understands the room and just gets brutally humiliated in this film in the most laughable and and just bizarre way possible. That I feel like for an actor to throw themselves into that role, especially like a role where you have to go from like, being suave to, like performing in a lot of sex scenes to just brutally being humiliated in this film. I think you really got to throw yourself into that role. Especially, there's one like perfect scene in this film where just like he's arguing with Emma Stone and just like they're not quite sure how to end the conversation, and Ruffalo has like pitch perfect timing about watching like all the frustration build on his face, where there's just a moment where you just see him get more and more red with barely saying a word. And it just, it floored me. So yeah, I mean, everyone is so damn good in this category, but if I had to pick, gotta pick just one, it's Mark Ruffalo for Poor Things. And now it's time for Best Actress, and the nominations are Annette Bening for Niad, Lily Gladstone for Killers of the Flower Moon, Sandra Hüller for Anatomy of a Fall, Carey Mulligan for Maestro, Emma Stone for Poor Things. And that's it. I don't know why I didn't put another and, but and it seems pretty clear as day here, at least for me, that this category is really going to come down between Lily Gladstone and Emma Stone. And it's mostly because like both their performances are great. Like it's like the characters they play go through such a journey and a transformation where they end up in a much different spot where they are before, and they have an amazing character growth throughout the narrative. And it's very tough call here because like for as much as like my favorite film of last year was Poor Things, as much as I want to pick Emma Stone here because I feel like her performance was incredibly daring for Poor Things, I gotta give it up for Lily Gladstone. Her performance. And just like the way that you see her transform throughout this narrative, not to mention a lot of the scenes where like, she's like, it feels like she's at death's door. And at one point where she just breaks down in just angry crying and sadness. A lot of like tough scenes that you have to try really hard to sell. Gladstone just knocks it out of the park. So it's like, it's, for as easy as it is, because like a lot of people are going to be saying Lily Gladstone is, the pick for Best Actress, and she probably is going to win the Oscar for this performance. I got to give it up for she nailed that performance. She knocked it out of the park. So yeah, my pick for Best Actress is Lily Gladstone in Killers of the Flower Moon. Now it's time for Best Actor, and the nominations for this category are Bradley Cooper in Maestro, Coleman Domingo in Rustin, Paul Giamatti in The Holdovers, Cillian Murphy in Oppenheimer, and Jeffrey Wright in American Fiction. And I know there's a lot of pull for Cillian Murphy, and I have no doubt in my mind that Murphy is going to win for Best Actor, but personally, for my best pick, and I know a lot of people are going to say it's usually what he usually does in his performances, but Paul Giamatti just really worked for me in The Holdovers. And I think it's just because Giamatti is cast for what you would expect from him in this role. But still, I think even knowing that like, okay, yeah, like this, curmudgeon-y teacher, that's perfect for Paul Giamatti, but it all depends on whether or not he can deliver it and not just sleepwalk through that role. And for me, at least, like Giamatti just makes that role work so well that I totally got engrossed in the character. Like there was never a moment where I felt like, like Giamatti was just putting on the usual glaze of frustration and like bickering that he usually brings to all his roles of just like, very hot-headed bald guys. And yeah, he makes this film work, and no disrespect, Cillian Murphy, he's great in the film, especially when you consider the transformation that he goes through in that film. Very, very commendable performance, especially for watching like the agony and the anxiety wash over his face as the film continues, and just like there's some close-ups of him that you're never going to be able to get out of your mind. It's a fantastic performance. But Paul Giamatti, just, again, by a hair here, my pick is Paul Giamatti for The Holdovers for Best Actor. And now we come to the final category, the top award, Best Picture. And the nominations are American Fiction, Anatomy of a Fall, Barbie, The Holdovers, Killers of the Flower Moon, Maestro, Oppenheimer, Past Lives, Poor Things, and The Zone of Interest. Very, very hard choices here, because, like, you know, outside of like Maestro, which I thought was it's a fine biopic, I would honestly be happy with just about any of these films winning. Like, it'd be really, you know, it'd be really like surprising if like the dark horse here of Past Lives, which is barely nominated for much, would win for Best Picture. That would be pretty cool here. But in terms of, like, if you were to ask me which film I felt deserved Best Picture here, I gotta give it to Poor Things. Poor Things was just like, and I know, like, you know, yeah, it's my favorite film of last year, and I've kind of chosen it for most of the categories here. But Poor Things just, it was such an intoxicating film, and it felt like it had such a freedom that I didn't feel as much in the other Best Picture nominations this year. That being said, it was surprising to see a Barbie film get as existential as it did and become, in addition to still becoming like a very fun film for the most part. And Oppenheimer is just wondrous, amazing filmmaking. Probably my favorite Christopher Nolan film, at least in like the past few years, for whatever that may be worth. But yeah, like, I mean, if you had to ask me among all these nominations, I gotta go with Poor Things. Poor Things is the film that I had a lot of fun with. I can't stop thinking about. It's gorgeous to look at. I'm fascinated by the performances. I love the world that Yorgos Lanthimos has built here. I love the weird soundtrack. I love all the bizarre camera angles and the circular blurs and distortions that he puts on the cameras. And it's just like a very wildly freeing film that I can't help it. It's my favorite film of last year. So my pick for Best Picture among all of these films is Poor Things. Although it's probably going to go to Oppenheimer.